They came beneath the crimson sky. Redrock, New Mexico, 1954. Chapter 1. The lights over Redrock, a town stitched from red dust, hot coffee, gossip, and long silences. One main road sliced through the center like a scar, flanked by brick storefronts, a rusted gas station, and the always buzzing neon of Ethel's diner. Church bells rang on Sundays. The sheriff knew everyone by name. Teenagers kissed behind the drive-in screen, and the only real danger was a rattler underfoot or a dust storm rolling in from the basin. Clara Reeves, the voice of KRX radio, signed off from her midnight broadcast with a flourish. Her voice, clear, confident, smoky, wrapped around the final sax notes of a Benny Carter record. And that's the night wind signing off, Redrock. Until tomorrow, keep your dials tuned and your dreams safe. She slid the vinyl from the turntable, placing it reverently in its sleeve. Clara loved the night shift. The silence between her words and the hum of the broadcast tower made her feel like she was holding the town in her hands, whispering lullabies into the void. But tonight, something was wrong. Static hissed in her headphones. Not unusual, tubes needed replacing and desert storms liked to play tricks, but this wasn't just noise. It had rhythm, a low pulsing, steady and unnatural. Clara frowned and turned the dials. The signal wasn't coming from inside the station. It was coming in, strong, intentional. She grabbed a reel-to-reel tape and hit record. Outside, the lights of Redrock flickered, then failed. The town went dark all at once. Across the desert basin, a red glow bloomed over Mesa Ridge, 5 orbs in a perfect arc, pulsing like heartbeats. Clara ran to the window and whispered, "Sweet mercy." She raced back to the mic. With the town's main power out, she hit the emergency backup. A rumbling diesel generator outside the station grumbled to life. The console sputtered back online. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. This is KRX Redrock Radio, broadcasting live on backup power. Folks, if you're seeing the sky like I am, don't panic. Stay indoors, stay tuned. We'll ride this out together. Sheriff Ed Mallory was already in his cruiser when the call came over the shortwave. A farmer named Boyle had found something sickening in his upper pasture. 3 head of cattle, split open clean as butcher's meat. No blood, no struggle. Mallory rubbed the bridge of his nose and lit a Chesterfield. Mallory wasn't the panicking type. At 48, he'd seen action in Europe, caught bank robbers, delivered babies on back roads. He'd taken this job in Redrock for the quiet. This didn't feel quiet. When he pulled into the Boyle property, he saw it. The animals were laid out like they'd been placed with surgical care. Their bodies didn't smell of death. There were burn marks on the grass, like someone had taken a branding iron the size of a truck wheel and scorched the earth. "Wasn't no coyote did this," Boyle muttered, wringing his hat in his hands. Mallory crouched beside the nearest carcass and ran a hand along the exposed ribcage. The cuts were clean, too clean. Above them, the sky pulsed again. At Whitmore Airfield, Captain Frank Harlan stared at the radar technician's screen. The man was pale, sweating. "Blips appeared 15 minutes ago, sir. No transponder, no altitude reading. They're just there." Harlan leaned closer. "You sure this isn't a calibration fault?" "I ran it twice." Frank Harlan had flown P-51s over Korea. He wasn't one to jump at shadows. But these weren't planes. They weren't balloons. They were moving too fast and too exact. He barked into the handset. "Scramble Observation Team Alpha. Eyes on the ridge. And get me a Jeep. I'm heading to Redrock." Back at KRX, Clara replayed the signal. Someone, was embedding a tonal pattern in the static. She slowed the reel and caught it. Musical intervals, low and mournful. Not random, a melody barely there. The emergency line rang. She picked up. "This is Pike, Arlen Pike." His voice was gravel-soaked in bourbon. "You pick up the anomaly? It's bouncing off every damn band I got." I tracked the echo to a harmonic frequency. "It's not noise, it's a map." Clara scribbled on a notepad. "Coordinates? Nope. Frequencies. Harmonic resonance. Hell, I think it's trying to talk to us." The line crackled and died. Danny Laird, 11 years old and sweetly strange, hadn't come home. His mother, pale and shaking, told Mallory that Danny had gone out to catch frogs by the creek that ran below Mesa Ridge. His bike was still leaning against a tree when they found it. But no sign of Danny. "Something ain't right," Mallory muttered. He drove to the station and found Clara still on air, relaying news calmly, giving updates, keeping the fear out of her voice. Clara, we got a problem. She gestured to the signal. So do I. It's alive, Ed. Captain Harlan arrived as the sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across Redrock. He met Mallory outside the station. What the hell's going on here? Harlan asked. Lights over the ridge, cattle carved like Thanksgiving turkey, a boy missing, and this. He handed over Clara's tape. Harlan listened on a portable player, his jaw tightening. This was picked up by Allied intelligence in Berlin, 1944, Harlan said quietly. Just once. Never again, until now. Clara blinked. You're saying this thing's been here before? Harlan didn't answer. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Static. The morning after the blackout, Redrock stirred under a sky the color of worn denim. Clara Reeves, eyes red from lack of sleep, sipped day-old coffee from a chipped mug in the KRX booth. The signal had quieted sometime around 3 a.m., but the reel-to-reel kept spinning. She had hours of recorded noise, and a gnawing sense it wasn't just noise. She threaded the tape back and slowed the playback, adjusting the tone knob until she heard it, dots and dashes faint beneath the static. Morse code. Someone, or something, had hidden a message in the pulse. She grabbed her old Navy manual and began decoding. We are already among you. She stared at the words. Her fingers trembled slightly. Before she could react, the phone rang. Clara, it's Mallory. Get down to the wash behind Thompson's mill. The wash was dry as always, but the sight above it defied logic. Sheriff Mallory pointed toward the cottonwood tree. Danny Laird's sneakers hung limply from the topmost branch, at least 50 feet up. Kid couldn't have climbed that? Mallory said, no marks, no scuffle, like they were placed there. The tree creaked slightly in the morning breeze. Could be a prank, Harlan offered, though his voice betrayed doubt. Mallory shook his head. You ever seen a prank this surgical? Nearby, a deputy gagged behind a bush. At Whitmore, Harlan gathered his team in the hangar. Radar had tracked a new object descending at 4:15 hours, but the signal vanished above Redrock Ridge. They dispatched a recon flight at dawn, 2 pilots and a spotter, but halfway through the flight, the Cessna's radio went dead. The plane returned 20 minutes late. The pilots, disoriented, had no memory past takeoff. The spotter sat catatonic in the rear seat, clutching a crucifix. We're grounded until I know what we're dealing with, Harlan growled. Meanwhile, Clara drove out to the edge of town to visit Arlen Pike. The ham radio shack sat behind his trailer, surrounded by rusted antenna towers and coiled copper wire. Inside it looked like a war bunker. Wires everywhere, old coffee tins full of solder and the smell of dust and ozone. I ran your signal through my analyzer, Arlen rasped. It's got harmonic layering I've only seen once. Berlin, back in '44. Came through our listening post in Dorset. My brother was stationed there. Clara leaned forward. And? They never cracked it. It came, then it stopped. They buried it. He handed her a photograph, black and white, a street scene in Berlin, 1927. But her eyes locked onto the background, a boy, blurry but unmistakable. Same cowlick, same striped shirt. Danny Laird. Where did you get this? British Archives, I keep copies. That kid's in more than one. By twilight, strange interference returned. Radios across town crackled to life on their own. Static built to a piercing shriek. Dogs howled. At 7:12 p.m., a low rumble rolled across the ground. Then, boom! The town's water tower exploded inward. Metal shrieked. Water rained down in steaming sheets. Mallory, Harlan, and Clara arrived minutes later. The structure was a tangled ruin. Inside the wreckage was something impossible. A smooth metal sphere the size of a beach ball, warm to the touch, etched with symbols that shimmered in the dark. It emitted a low, constant hum. Mallory reached out. It responded, glowing faintly. What the hell is that? Harlan whispered. Clara's voice was barely audible. A message. Chapter 3. The Man Who Never Was. The stranger arrived in Redrock just after noon. A tall man in a black suit, thin as a rail, with a narrow black tie and fedora. He stepped off the Trailways bus from Albuquerque without a suitcase. His shoes were polished, but the dust didn't cling to them. He walked with purpose, as if he'd already memorized the streets. At Ethel's diner, he ordered black coffee, sat at the counter, and spoke little. His ID, when shown to the town clerk, identified him as Mr. Gray, Department of Weather. The badge looked official, but it had no seal, no state emblem, and he offered no explanation beyond that. When Mallory arrived to greet him, Mr. Gray stood slowly and shook hands with gloved fingers. His grip was cold. "You're investigating the weather?" Mallory asked, trying not to sound amused. "There's a pressure anomaly in this region," Gray said. "Electromagnetic shifts, unusual cloud density. I'm here to observe." Mallory nodded slowly. "Well, long as you're not poking around the base or our kids." "I have no interest in children," Gray said without blinking. Clara Reeves received more calls than usual during her evening broadcast. Most were jittery from people outside Redrock, listeners who had somehow picked up her station. From Nevada, from Nebraska, even from Canada. One caller, a woman from Ohio, whispered, "It's happening here too. I saw them above the field last night, and my neighbor hasn't aged in 30 years. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth as another call came in. The line clicked, and a deep male voice said, "Do not investigate further. End transmission." Then silence. She yanked the receiver out of the wall. That night, Mallory tailed Mr. Gray as he left the diner and walked north past the hardware store and the church ruins. Gray moved like he knew exactly where he was going. He stopped at the wreckage of the water tower. From a distance, Mallory watched as Gray kneeled beside the metallic sphere. The man placed his palm against the surface. The object lit up. Gray leaned close and whispered something, too soft to hear. The sphere responded with a pulse of light. Mallory stepped on a twig. Gray's head jerked. For the first time, he looked unsettled. Mallory raised his flashlight. "Evening, Mr. Gray." Gray stood. His expression didn't change, but Mallory saw something flicker behind his eyes, like the way a radio station drifts off frequency. "I don't recommend interfering, Sheriff." "Don't recall giving you access to that wreckage." Gray took one slow step forward. "You don't recall much at all, Sheriff." Mallory drew his revolver. "I'm not in the mood for riddles." Suddenly, Gray flickered. Just for a second, like bad film stock. Then he steadied. His mouth curled slightly. "I am not your enemy." The next morning, Harlan received word from the recon team. They had been found 6 miles outside the airfield perimeter, walking barefoot through the desert. Their uniforms were faded and torn. One had collapsed. The other 2 were speaking in fragments. "I saw the ridge," one muttered. "It opened up, and then the stars changed." When Harlan examined them, his jaw tightened. They were aged. Skin leathery, eyes sunken. The youngest, Private Lutz, age 21, now looked 60. "Get them to the infirmary, quietly," Harlan told his aide. "No leaks." Clara went to Mallory's office. He sat at his desk, turning something over in his hand. A button. Not just any button, silver, slightly translucent and warm to the touch. He'd found it at the site where Gray had vanished. "He disappeared, Clara, in front of me, like he got sucked into thin air." Clara set a file down in front of him. It contained old security documents from the Berlin incident Pike had mentioned. Names redacted, photos blurred, but one stuck out, Mr. Gray, same suit, same face, dated 1944. "This man hasn't aged," Clara whispered. "He was there, and now he's here." Mallory rubbed his temples. "We're in over our heads." That evening, Clara went back on the air. She told only part of the story. "Something is happening in Redrock, and it may not be isolated. If you've seen the lights, if you've heard the signal, call me." The switchboard lit up. Stories poured in. A farmer in Kansas saw orbs hovering over his cornfield. A mother in Utah described her daughter sleepwalking and speaking in a tongue she didn't know. Then one call froze her. "Your voice was on my radio last night," said a man from Idaho. "You told us to dig." Clara's hand shook. "I was off air last night." "No, it was you. Same tone, same cadence. But you weren't you." Later, Mallory returned to Ethel's diner. He sat at the counter, rubbing his eyes. Behind him, the bell above the door jingled. 3 men entered. Identical suits, black hats, pale faces, sunglasses, though the sun had set. They walked slowly to a booth and watched him. Mallory's hand drifted toward his holster. Chapter 4, Open the Sky. It began with the stars. Clara Reeves was sitting on her porch with her cat curled in her lap, watching the sky above Mesa Ridge. The stars were out, but wrong. Vega was too far east. The Big Dipper appeared twisted, and Orion's belt had a 4th star. She blinked, looked again. They hadn't moved, they had shifted, permanently. She scribbled notes by flashlight, then stepped back inside. A soft vibration buzzed beneath her floorboards. The cat hissed and fled. At the elementary school, young Josie Carter, barely 9, began drawing again. She hadn't spoken in 3 days. Today she handed her mother a page covered in mechanical diagrams. Gears, rings, electrical loops, strange inscriptions. Mrs. Carter took them to the school principal, who showed them to Mallory. "Josie says she saw this in her dreams," the principal said. "She calls it the sleeper machine." Mallory ran a hand across his jaw. "Get me Clara." At KRRX, Clara and Harlan met Mallory in the back of the sheriff's office. Josie's drawings were laid out on a folding table. Clara's eyes scanned the lines. "Wait," she said, pointing. "This matches the surface etching on the sphere." Harlan nodded slowly. "And this," he pointed to a 3-ring diagram, "this looks like a hatch." Mallory pulled out a topographical map of the area. "There's an old dried-up lake bed 6 miles west. Army used it for drills during the war. What if this sleeper machine is buried there?" Clara looked to Harlan. "We have to go." At the lake bed, dust clung to their boots as they scanned the cracked surface. Josie's drawing pointed to a large rock formation in the center. Beneath it, the soil was loose. Hours of digging revealed metal, curved, impossibly smooth, the top of something circular. It was a hatch. Harlan placed his hand on the surface. The sphere, carried in a lead-lined case, began to hum louder. Mallory stepped back. "It's reacting." Clara knelt beside it. "Or, it's waking up." That night, back at KRRX, Clara prepped her regular broadcast. Listeners were tense but grateful for her voice. She queued up a Miles Davis track. But as the music played, the studio lights dimmed. Her microphone flickered. Then a high tone rang through her headphones. Her voice, distorted, emerged from the speakers, not hers but using her voice. "Prepare the soil." The reel spun. She tried to stop the broadcast, but the controls locked. "Prepare the soil." Again, again, over and over, until suddenly, silence. At the diner, the patrons froze as radios blared the same message. Across town, phones rang, but no one spoke on the other end, just breathing. Back at the lakebed, the hatch turned. Slowly. Tremors rippled through the earth. Street lamps flickered. Storefront glass trembled. Clara, breathless, stared at her console. Then came a final message, uttered in her voice but from something beyond her. The root must remember the sky. Mallory, Clara, and Harlan arrived at the lakebed just in time to see a faint red glow leaking from beneath the hatch. "It's opening," Harlan said quietly. Chapter 5. Crimson Descent. The hatch opened with the slowness of something ancient awakening. It wasn't mechanical, at least not in any way Harlan recognized. The circular lid rotated, releasing no smoke or steam, just silence. The smell that rose from it was earthy and metallic, like rain on hot iron. Beneath the hatch was a chamber. Inside it, something moved. They called in the National Guard. By noon, the lakebed was surrounded by soldiers. Trucks blocked the roads. Helicopters circled overhead. But Clara, Harlan, and Mallory were escorted inside the perimeter. No one argued. The men in black hadn't spoken, but their presence was enough. Authority bent around them. From a distance, the thing emerging from beneath the hatch looked like a tower. Up close, it was clear it wasn't made by human hands. It rose with slow grace, unfurling in the shape of Redrock's church steeple, an exact replica, only made of gleaming metal and strange flowing panels that shimmered like water. But the original steeple, 3 miles away, had collapsed earlier that day, rusted through as if aged a century overnight. "It didn't copy it," Clara said. "It replaced it." That night, as Clara prepared to return to the station, she found the booth locked from the inside. Through the glass, the console was lit. The reel-to-reel spun slowly, and her voice was speaking. "Prepare! Prepare! The vessel awaits." She pounded on the door, but it didn't open. The mic light glowed red. Someone or something was transmitting from within. Harlan and Mallory forced the door. Inside, the room was empty. The tape stopped spinning. Clara sat heavily, shaken. "It's using me," she whispered. "It's using my voice." Mallory hadn't seen his deputy Charlie since the hatch opened. He went looking, gut-twisting. He found him behind the courthouse, face up, eyes wide open. Charlie's body was pristine, no wounds, but when Mallory touched his neck, it gave slightly, hollow. He unbuttoned Charlie's shirt and froze. There was no blood, no flesh, just crystal. His organs had been replaced with translucent geometries, beautiful and wrong. Mallory staggered back, bile rising in his throat. At Whitmore Airfield, a technician ran a scheduled scan of the sublevels, cataloging cryo-storage from decommissioned experiments. One drawer stood out. Unit 17B. Inside lay Frank Harlan, breathing, frozen, suspended. The technician sounded the alarm, but before he could finish the report, two men in black entered the room. No one saw the technician again. The sun set crimson, not red, deep glowing crimson like the sky itself had bled. As it dipped below the horizon, the moon appeared to vanish, eclipsed by something unseen. Redrock quaked, cups danced on tables, books fell from shelves. A low hum filled the air, felt more than heard. And then the town began to rise, just an inch, maybe two, enough to feel it in your teeth, enough to know the ground no longer held. Clara gripped the edge of her console. "Ed," she whispered into the mic, "the town is floating." Mallory didn't answer. He was staring at the sky, where a shadow had begun to grow. Chapter 6. Occupation. At dawn, Redrock was no longer on the map, literally. A shimmer rose from the ground and cloaked the town in a dome. An iridescent, faintly humming field. Roads vanished into haze. Radios beyond the perimeter turned to static. The power lines ended in sparks. Inside the dome, people moved like ghosts. Some wept, others raged. Most simply waited. Clara sat in the KRX booth, staring at the mic. She had not spoken on air since the night before. She couldn't be sure which broadcasts were hers anymore. The tapes played back her voice, but said things she did not remember saying. Prepare the soil. Anchor the breath. Harvest will begin. Her hands shook as she lit a cigarette. She didn't inhale. The phone rang. It shouldn't have. "Hello?" she said. A mechanical voice responded, low, grainy. "You are not alone in Redrock." A crackle. Then silence. Sheriff Mallory followed the trail of broken glass and scorched footprints to the old watchtower near the edge of town. On the highest platform stood a man he didn't recognize, a gaunt figure with wire-rimmed glasses and a long coat. "I've been waiting since 1881, the man said, not turning. "Who are you?" "The Earth Chain," the man replied. "We're the last resistance, hidden in plain sight." Mallory narrowed his eyes. "Why here? Why Redrock?" "Because she was born here," he said, "even if she doesn't know it." He handed Mallory a folded birth certificate. Clara Reeves, except it wasn't. The name on the original document was redacted. Date of birth altered, adopted, rewritten. She's not entirely what she thinks she is. That night, time unraveled. It started small, coffee steaming in reverse, a dropped plate reassembling in a man's hand. But soon people began to change. Elderly men woke up younger. Teenagers blinked into adulthood. Infants aged years in minutes. Clocks spun forward, then stopped. The town's timepieces struck 13. The soil darkened. Black moss replaced the red dust, glowing faintly in the moonless light. Crops withered overnight, replaced by spiny bioluminescent stalks that hissed when touched. Rain fell, thick and black, vanishing on contact. Clara stood in the center of Main Street as the shimmer dome sparked around her. A man stepped through, a figure from her dreams. Pale skin, black eyes, his voice came before his lips moved. "You are the bridge." She stumbled backward. Harlan caught her. He had seen the cryo chamber, had seen himself inside it. "I don't think I'm me anymore," he said softly. Clara looked at him and didn't disagree. Inside the hatched chamber beneath the lake bed, Clara walked alone. The walls were alive, etched with symbols that pulsed when she passed. She placed her hand on the mural. It told a story of something sent away long ago, not to explore, not to conquer, to return. It was never an invasion, it was reclamation. Atop the clock tower, Mallory looked to the east. A second sun rose over Redrock, not warm, not yellow, cold and crimson, and closer than it should be. Chapter 7. Blood of the Sky. The Earth Chain called it the Reckoning. Clara Reeves stood before a mirror that no longer reflected just her. Her face split, layered, distorted like overlapping photographs. In one image she was the radio host, skeptical and sharp. In another, taller, paler, eyes like obsidian, lips that moved before her thoughts. "You were never fully theirs," said the Earth Chain's contact, Jonah Vale. "You were seeded. Your lineage was selected." "I'm not a weapon," Clara said. "No, you're the beacon." The townsfolk had divided, the woken. Those touched by the signal, speaking in strange tongues, their eyes glowing faintly at night, walked the streets as if in communion with something unseen. The grounded. Those clinging to memory and fear, barricaded homes, whispered prayers, watched loved ones shift. Mallory walked both camps, his badge irrelevant now. He watched a child age into an old man in front of her parents. He watched a man step through a doorway and emerge as someone else entirely. Nothing held steady anymore. At Whitmore, Harlan stared at the replication process, the double. His double had begun to multiply, not instantaneously, not even efficiently, but purposefully. 3 now stood in the hangar, all of them him. "I'm the last original," he whispered, and he knew it wouldn't last. Deep beneath the hatch chamber, Clara stood at a junction. Jonah Vale and the Earth Chain had uncovered a device, a column wrapped in braided metals and glowing strands of quartz-like tissue. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "This is the anchor," Jonah said. "It contains your signal, the part of you that can call the others." "I don't want to call them." "You already have." Clara touched the beacon. The sky outside cracked. Mallory led the last grounded into the hatch. They carried dynamite, old mining charges from the edge of the ridge. If they could sever the connection, maybe time would heal. But when they looked down into the core of the hatch, they found no floor. Just depth. Miles. At the bottom, shapes. Moving. Watching. Echoes of the future. Voices from timelines that had never happened. Clara climbed to the roof of KRX, wind tearing at her coat. Above her, the second sun pulsed erratically. The shimmer dome trembled. Reality wavered. She placed her palm to her chest. Beneath the skin, the beacon lit up. She screamed, not in pain, but in resonance. A wave of sound swept across Redrock. Time split. 2 towns existed side by side. One old and dusty, one black-veined and gleaming. People flickered. Choices collapsed. And Clara stood in the middle. Chapter 8. The Day That Never Was. Redrock split like a pane of glass. 2 towns, 2 timelines. One familiar, one twisted by alien purpose existed side by side. One with weathered brick and wooden porches. The other pulsed with black moss, lightless towers, and unnatural winds. Clara Reeves stood between them, moving through unstable air, guided by shortwave radio pulses transmitted from her own booth. With each pulse, she stepped across boundaries, anchoring the spaces long enough to pull the others through. But each crossing came at a cost. She was forgetting. Names, faces, her own reflections. The timelines fought for dominance, and memory was the first casualty. Sheriff Mallory, eyes bloodshot, stared into the shaft below the hatch. It no longer seemed to end. Somewhere deep within, voices echoed upward, begging, promising, mourning. He strapped the dynamite to his chest. "This ends with us," he said to Jonah Vale. Jonah gave a small nod. "Or begins again." Mallory descended the platform. Clara called out, but he didn't stop. When he reached the edge, he lit the fuse and stepped into the dark. The explosion shook both red rocks. In the aftermath, the shimmer dome collapsed. The black sun flickered and died. The skies cleared, revealing stars in their proper places. But the invaders remained. Not invaders, but refugees. Their world, a failed experiment, had collapsed. They had fled through time, not space. "We were born of you," one said to Clara. "You seeded us. You forgot." She didn't respond. The choice was not conquest or resistance. It was survival, merging. 2 timelines, incompatible, locked in collapse. But the beacon within Clara offered a bridge, a way to fuse the two into one survivable thread of reality. The cost, history, the truth. Redrock would continue, but not remember. Clara stood in the center of town as the new day rose. She closed her eyes, activated the beacon one last time. A wave of silence swept the town. Morning, 1954. The sun rose bright over Mesa Ridge. The diner opened at 6. The sheriff nodded to passers-by. KRRX played a morning jazz set. Everything normal, everything quiet. Clara Reeves sat alone in her booth, sipping coffee. A faint hum echoed from the reel-to-reel, but there was no tape. She touched her temple. A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't know why.